After 54 years under the Assad regime, Syria is moving on. We examine the early days of the new order, the shifting alliances and narratives, and the rebirth of the media there, both mainstream and social. Israel continues to bomb Syrian targets and take over territory. Where's the coverage of that story? And cities under surveillance, technology that watches us, for better or worse. Syria is experiencing an unprecedented, previously unimaginable moment in its history, the end of what they called Assadism. Bashar al-Assad's regime didn't just fall, it evaporated. Its forces collapsed without really putting up a fight. Before Syrians knew it, their dictatorial leader was in exile in Moscow, ending a political dynasty that had lasted more than half a century. In the weeks since, the country's media space has undergone a paradigm shift. The narrative is being rewritten. State-controlled television, long a mouthpiece for Assad's propaganda, now broadcasts messages of the revolution. Syrians are saying things on social media, putting their names out there in ways they couldn't before. Meanwhile, the coalition of Islamist rebel groups now in charge, HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, is rebranding. Its carefully orchestrated media campaign has its leader, Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, preaching unity and inclusion. And while Syrians welcome that messaging, many are wondering whether it will translate into a real transformation for the country and its people. The images that came out after the defeat of the Assad regime will be forever burned into Syrian memory banks. The unfurling of the revolutionary flag in downtown Damascus. Traffic jams, joyously long ones, hundreds of thousands of refugees returning home. The resulting family reunions, the tears shed. The freeing of prisoners Syrians thought they would never see again. The toppling of the statues, symbolizing the downfall of a dynasty. Gunfire aimed at the sky and not people for a change. And the new, rebellious face of state-controlled television.
For more than half a century, any Syrian would not, in their wildest dreams, have imagined that on Syria national television there would be anything other than the Assad narrative.
Throughout the uprising, the official Syrian TV kept broadcasting the idea that this is all fake news, this is all propaganda. And so there's a huge significance in the first broadcast coming out.
إلى من راهن علينا ومن لم يراهن نزف لكم من شاشة الإخبارية السورية انتصار الثورة السورية العظيمة.
This is a moment of liberation, and now we are celebrating. Tomorrow is a different day. Even if the devil comes and rules Syria, the devil is going to be way better than the Assad family.
The real test is what kind of images we're going to be seeing next. Despite removing the regime's pictures from the streets, toppling their status, I don't think the state of fear is left yet.
Since the takeover, the state-controlled broadcaster has been in a state of flux. Initially, Syrians were seeing hours of rebel propaganda videos, along with revolutionary songs, some of which were Islamic. By the end of the week, most of that content had been replaced by political statements, with news reports from across the country mixed in. The more striking changes are on social media, where Syrians inside the country or living abroad are showing themselves in ways they haven't before, using their real names, speaking more freely, without fear of retaliation against their families or friends, consenting to be interviewed, speaking their mind.
This is my first time publicly speaking about being Sana Kirchia. I have been working undercover for 13 years. It's my first time.
Syrians who didn't want their parents, their family members to be detained or tortured by the regime, they used fake names. And now the trend is that my name is so-and-so. I have been hiding my real name because my family was afraid of being tortured. So to see all these posts coming online, you cry, because I used to have a fake name.
As a journalist, all that time that I was reporting on Syria, I couldn't use my name. I did give some interviews on camera when I was in the US a few years ago while the war was still going on. But then I realized that might have been putting my own loved ones in a precarious position. So I stopped.
I get so many messages from people that I've known for a very long time who only dare to message me since the fall of the regime, saying, we're sorry, we were too scared to even message me privately because I'm an outspoken journalist. Many journalists working in Damascus now are still self-censoring because it's chaos, because there is no system, no protection. So I don't feel like we have a free press, but there is hope now.
Job one for HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the alliance of Islamist rebel groups now in charge, is rebranding, distancing the movement from its early links to al-Qaeda. In a country where the vast majority are Sunni Muslims, messages of reassurance have been sent to religious and ethnic minorities, including Christians, Kurds, and Shia Muslims.
ونوصي إخوان المجاهدين كما أوصيناهم في السابق بأن يعطفوا على الناس ومن ترك سلاحه فيؤمنوه ومن فر فلا يدركوه.
Promises have been offered of safety for displaced Syrians who want to return home. Messages also tailored to get regional support, particularly from neighboring Turkey. HTS's leader, Ahmed al-Shara, is also known by his nom de guerre, Abu Muhammad al-Jolani. He has been sending subtle, non-verbal signals of his own.
I was astonished by the rebranding campaign of Ahmed al-Shara. I mean, besides shortening his beard, the kind of Sunni style where you don't have any mustache, also a bit changed, taking off al-amama, which reminds international audiences of al-Qaeda and of Osama bin Laden, and replacing it with that military suit, which is Zelensky style, which is very adorable by the Western media. So the moves, the messages mentioning minorities, speaking about tolerance, speaking about no revenge, very well studied, very well consistent.
When Jolani delivered his speech at the Umayyad Mosque, there was an interesting moment when the men in the mosque all started chanting in unison to lionize him in a way. This sort of imagery was often used by Assad regime loyalists to show how scary they are, the Islamists, this is ISIS, to scare people. But Jolani immediately stepped down and tried to disengage a little bit with the crowd. You know, everybody just calm down. No one lionize me. Because he could have whipped the crowd into more of a frenzy, which would have scared people. So far, he's saying a lot of the right things and doing a lot of the right things.
This is in a way now almost a luxury that we're talking about political differences and ideological differences, because previously we were talking about war crimes and chemical weapons and forced disappearances. So Syria has entered into a new chapter, and with HTS, no one would ever thought that they would give safe refuge to regime soldiers, for example, or to engage with minorities and sign deals with them. And that's exactly what has happened.
The toppling of the statues and the unfurling of the flags had a familiar feel to them. But nothing lit up social media and marked the true end of the Assad era, like the throwing open of the doors at the Sednaya prison in Damascus. The liberation of those locked up there, some for decades, the stories they told, captured and epitomized the brutality of the regime. Countless inmates were tortured or killed at Sednaya and other prisons like it. Many of the people who went there and waited for news did not know if they would find the family members they were looking for, or even if they were dead or alive. If the rebel forces taking over Damascus were looking to create goodwill, their decision to head straight for Sednaya before they took over the presidential palace produced it.
I think that played a huge part in even kind of not questioning who is capturing Damascus and who is replacing Assad at that point. It was like the prisons are being liberated. This is the core of the uprising. Unlike the rebranding of Ahmed al-Shara, I don't think this was intentional, but they will be remembered for being the people who broke into those slaughterhouses.
Searching for any survivors from Zaina prison, all the bad memories for all their mothers, that there is a big chance that their sons are dead and they will never see them again. To know that 200,000 Syrian detainees were in jail since 2011 until now. Most of them were peacefully resisting the regime or defected from the regime army because they didn't want to participate in killing their brothers and sisters. They didn't deserve to be treated like this. No one on earth deserves to be treated like this.
As horrific as it is, it will help us as Syrians preserve the narrative, because in a couple of years' time, people are going to be like, oh, you know, the regime wasn't so bad. Look at other contexts in the conflict. But the fact that these pictures are coming out will help cement the narrative that it could not possibly get worse when it comes to the torture and the industrial scale of enforced disappearance, arbitrary detention. When it comes to crimes and crimes against humanity, I simply cannot imagine that happening.
One major development in the Syria story that is getting relatively little media attention is the war that Israel has been waging on the country, which happens to be illegal. The narrative on Israeli outlets and the muted coverage in the Western media both tell a story of their own. And Meenakshi Ravi is here with more.
Israel has been illegally attacking Syria on a regular basis for years, usually free from scrutiny by Israeli or Western news outlets. But the assault it has mounted by both land and air this past week is of an altogether different scale. In an operation that a senior Israeli official has called one of the largest in the history of the country's air force, Israel has bombed Syria close to 500 times, destroying up to 80% of its military assets and the entirety of its navy, according to the Israeli government. On the ground, Israeli soldiers have captured the so-called buffer zone that for half a century separated the Golan Heights, Syrian land that Israel occupies illegally, from the rest of Syria. Israel claims its actions are to prevent Syria's military hardware falling into the hands of, quote, extremists, and to protect its piece of Syrian territory. Bombing a sovereign state, invading it and seizing its land are all illegal under international law, though you might not know it if you've been following this story in the Western or Israeli press. In Israel, pundits have been celebrating the violations, with reporters stating openly that Israel has no plans to give up its new territory.
אני קורא מכאן למי שמקבל את ההחלטות כמה שיותר שטח לכבוש, ולא שזה יישאר זמני אצלנו.
Western news coverage has been remarkable for how little there's been, and a near absence of the word illegal, which is used liberally and justifiably so in the reporting of similar violations by countries like Russia. As the coverage of the Gaza genocide makes clear, a different standard seems to apply when the perpetrator is Israel.
Thanks, Meena. We live in a unique time in human history. More than half the planet's population now lives in urban areas. That presents all sorts of challenges for housing, infrastructure, and climate resilience. And as people have concentrated in cities, our behavior, where we go, who we meet, what we do, has never been more surveilled than it is right now. It is a byproduct of population density. To build better cities, one approach being pushed by governments and corporations alike is the idea of a smart city, one that uses technology to collect data to better operate services. Some of the effects of the smart city approach are benign, even beneficial. But being watched can also have a profound effect on the rights and freedoms of citizens, who are often unaware of how closely they are being surveilled. The Listening Post's Tarek Nafa now on the smart city vision, its dystopian underbelly, and where this technology is taking us.
To meet the challenges of our booming urban spaces, citizens around the world are increasingly being told that their cities need to become smart. Smart city is a catch-all buzzword to describe how technology can be integrated into cities to make them supposedly more efficient, more green, and more safe. But the smart city approach is also radically changing the metropolis in ways that make citizens more watched and trackable than ever before. You can see that transformation in two cities that have labeled themselves smart: Hyderabad in India, one of the most surveilled places on the planet, and Hong Kong.
The Hong Kong government launched what is called the Smart City project, and they are actually aiming to be a world-class smart city. And what it means is you see more and more surveillance cameras in Hong Kong. Only this year, the government has installed 2,000 more around the city. And as you're traveling around, you see something called the smart lamppost, and you don't really know what it's for. It proclaims itself to be for monitoring air quality. But in fact, people always wonder, oh, is that actually also for facial recognition? So the Smart City initiative allows the Hong Kong government to digitize your life such that your life leaves behind trails and trails of documentation of how you live, where you live, what you do, and who you hang out with.
Hyderabad in India, in the state of Telangana, is one of Modi's 100 smart cities. What we see there is the digitization of education and healthcare services, automated monitoring of traffic, so seemingly benign aspects like that. But in addition to that, we have the integrated command and control center, whereby policing and data collection will be centralized. They're trying to invisibilize the policing infrastructure and embed it into the city. And so you've got thousands of cameras. That is sold to the public as a public safety measure. And historically, it's a Muslim-dominated city. And that's an interesting historical context to think about, given the Hindu nationalist Modi government and the kind of long history of the surveillance and persecution of Muslims in the city. The central promise of the smart city, despite its kind of techno-utopian visions, it's actually about managing disorder and chaos, managing certain populations who are deemed kind of a threat.
In Hyderabad and Hong Kong, the smart city narrative has obscured the far-reaching ways the state collects information about its citizens. At their heart, that's what smart cities are about, collecting huge swathes of data to automate how a city is governed. How is that data collected? We unwittingly give it away when we use our phones, get into a car, or tap a smart card to get on the metro. The integration of sophisticated cameras and sensors lets city managers do everything from monitoring traffic patterns to recording a person's movement around a city. It's a vision that is driven by technological solutions and the tech companies that provide them.
Smart city is really a marketing term for a package of surveillance, right? The way you get a smart city is you buy some technology that lets you do surveillance, and then theoretically you make some smart decisions based on that data. We don't have a lot of data that supports that it makes cities better. We do know what it does is it gives the city a lot of data that they didn't previously have. Cities have been feeling like competitive with corporations because they start to feel like, oh my God, Google, Facebook know more about the people in my city and what they want and what they need than we do. And so ultimately there's a bit of a tension there where cities want what the corporations have and then they go out and seek to buy it.
Tech giants have been telling us that the smart city is the solution to this crisis of populations growing in urban centres. We're going to need to figure out, how do we do housing? How do we feed ourselves? What are going to be our solutions to climate change, for instance? And so the vision of the techno-utopian smart city is saying technology can solve all of that for you. What is not part of their purported vision is actually this more sinister side, which is that tech corporations and their partners are using the smart city model to actually consolidate their power and their control over the city and over our lives as well.
As more power is ceded to multinational companies offering to remake our cities, it becomes harder to scrutinize how our data is being collected and to what end. Experience shows that those companies are often motivated not by public good, but by a desire to exploit the data they collect for profit.
So for instance, corporations such as MasterCard, they are interested in extracting data as it relates to digital ID systems.
With actionable data insights, we enable the public sector to make informed policy decisions.
So they partner with Edemia, a French biometrics firm, and they provide solutions into smart cities everywhere and are also extracting vast quantities of data that can then intersect with state data collection.
Our advanced biometric and cryptographic technologies are behind a lot of things you already know and trust. We think about them so you don't have to.
We've seen how undocumented migrants who might use some of these MasterCard solutions, that can reveal someone's status to the Department of Homeland Security, for instance. So we can see how these things intersect and interplay, and often these interests of data extraction are aligned.
The Silicon Valley billionaires seem to be moving towards building their own systems of surveillance and their own smart cities. Some of the leading tech moguls have actually started their own efforts to build cities in California, allegedly to solve the housing crisis.
Eastern Solano County, where a new community can rise.
But they want to build them in this sort of smart city tech utopia way that the surveillance will be built in from the beginning.
A community that is well thought out and well laid out.
Like a company town on steroids. The worst of what we saw when companies built towns for their laborers, and then the laborers were sort of trapped in these ecosystems and had to buy from the company store. At least in a company town of the old days, you could go into your house and complain about the boss, right? That won't be possible in these new smart cities. And I really worry about that becoming some sort of model where the only way we can get what we need, which is new housing, is to agree to those terms.
More than half of the world's rapidly growing population now live in cities, a figure the UN says will rise to nearly 70% by 2050. There is a need to make cities smarter and better equipped at dealing with the challenges of the future. But there is nothing utopian about a vision centered on increased surveillance and maximizing data extraction, especially when in the hands of authoritarian governments. Because pervasive surveillance, the feeling of being constantly watched, has a chilling effect. Rather than make us safer, smart cities may become spaces that feel more unsettling and less secure.
When these technologies are used ethically, and also when they're used responsibly, I don't doubt that they can contribute to bettering people's lives. But at the same time, when the government or people behind this infrastructure has a record of human rights abuses, then we have to be very careful about how this technology is being used, because they are collecting a large amount of data that can help them do very evil things very effectively.
The way that smart cities are shaping up and the way that surveillance technologies and all these technologies are being deployed, it's actually going to impact on who the city is for, who belongs to the city and who doesn't belong to the city. And so in that sense, it impacts on all of our fundamental rights. And especially with the rise of authoritarianism, our ability to push back and shape the city in the ways that we want to are going to be suppressed. And so that's something that, we should all care about dearly.
And finally, back to Syria, where the collapse of the Assad regime has led to the return of Syrians in exile, including journalists. Under Assad's rule, journalists working for outlets critical of the regime often did so under the radar, keeping their identities a secret. That included some of those working abroad who feared the consequences of traveling back to their homeland. This past week, many of those journalists have returned and are reporting from there, some for the first time. We'll leave you with one of them, Dima Izzadeen, a broadcaster for the Qatar-funded pan-Arab network Al-Arabi, and her emotional homecoming on the air.
أنا ديما عز الدين الصحفية السورية أعود إلى بلدي سوريا وإلى مدينة دمشق بعد 14 عاما من الفقد والحرمان. هذه ليست قصتي فحسب، بل هي قصة كل إن لم يكن معظم الصحفيين السوريين خارج. أول مرة أقوم بوظيفتي في مدينتي، أنقل أخبار بلدي. شكرا لتحملكم.